It's a very special thrill for me to be here to participate with Owen and his family as he is inaugurated. And it's a special thrill to be with this group of historians. I've had to follow the eloquence of both John and Annette before, and it's a challenge. I also want to tell you that, we're obviously here to inaugurate Owen. And we'll talk about the Civil War too, why not? But what you don't know enough yet, perhaps, is that he's also one very fine historian. I was his dissertation advisor, and I read all of those long chapters. But he has written a terrific study of the Civil War and Reconstruction Supreme Court. And if you all can ever give him a month off some summer, that's going to become a book in a bookstore near you. But I'm really here to take my 10 or 12 minutes to talk about a great Kentuckian, a great Southerner, a great American writer, Robert Penn Warren, who had, I think, as much to say in some of the deepest, most lasting ways about the memory of the Civil War as any American writer, any. He wrote a little book in 1961, which is still a little kind of Bible in those of us who are on that list of 1-800-dial memory right now for Civil War memory with the sesquicentennial. Warren's little book called The Legacy of the Civil War in 1961, he wrote originally as a long essay for Life magazine. And one day his editor, Jerry Korn, writes to Red in 1960 and says, "Red, what you really have to do here is explain to the country why we have these attractions to the Civil War. What is it? What's the appeal," he kept saying in this letter. "You got to explain that." And Red Warren writes back and says, "Well, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to explain the appeal." And he writes back in a private letter, and he says, "I suppose it's because we think that war made us so great we're like the dog that just keeps looking at the icebox." That's a wonderful Warren-esque homely metaphor, but is that what we have done with the Civil War over time? Are we a little bit sometimes like rubberneckers at a horrible car accident with this event? It's that extraordinary, huge event of horror and loss and war. Is that what we've done with this event? In that little book, Warren said so many other things that are quotable, but one of them is, he said, "The Civil War," I quote him, "draws us as an oracle, darkly unriddled and portentous, of national as well as personal fate." Oracle. If the Civil War is America's oracle, as John McArdle really just said, it never goes away. And of course, Reconstruction never goes away either. We just don't seem to be as aware of how Reconstruction doesn't go away. But if the Civil War is our oracle, where is it? What is it? Is it on Cemetery Ridge at Gettysburg, that moment in the war that seems to be a turning of the tide or something? Is it on Monument Avenue in Richmond, which is still sometimes a bit of a surprise to foreigners who come to America and they see Monument Avenue and they sometimes want to ask, so how is it the losers of the great Civil War get this kind of, never mind, you want to say. There's a couple books you can read on that, but gosh, it's complicated, you end up saying. Is it at Stone Mountain in Georgia? Is that where our oracle is? Or is it the Lincoln Memorial, America's great secular temple? Is that why we go to the Lincoln Memorial and stand there and weep in front of those words? Or we try to go late at night when all the 7th graders aren't there screaming so we can actually think? Is it why every kind of group, left and right and in between, has appropriated the Lincoln Memorial? Is that where we find the oracle? Is it the Shaw Memorial in Boston, Augustus St. Gaudens's masterpiece of sculpture, the greatest Civil War work of art? You can decide whether it's your favorite monument, as I have. The story of the 54th Massachusetts, told on a bas-relief. Is your oracle in a favorite passage by Bruce Catton or Shelby Foote, or in a favorite poem of Walt Whitman's? or in a favorite piece of oratory by Martin Luther King Jr., or in an essay by James Baldwin. Arguably the greatest Civil War centennial speech ever given during the centennial of the Civil War, 50 years ago, was King's I Have a Dream speech. It's always remembered as the dream speech, but he doesn't get to the dream, as some of you know, until the last 3 minutes of a 17-minute speech. The first 14 minutes of that speech are all about the Civil War and how unfinished it is. Where's the oracle? What is the oracle? We all pick and choose. We're never quite sure. But it does not go away. Back to Red Warren, just for a few minutes. Many of you know that Robert Penn Warren was born in Guthrie, Kentucky, in Todd County, down on the Tennessee border in 1905. To endlessly ponder the meaning and nature of the past was to Robert Penn Warren as natural as breathing. And remembering the Civil War was as natural as breathing. He first heard the music of poetry and storytelling as a small boy at his grandfather's feet, sitting on an unkept lawn in front of a farmhouse in Christian County, Kentucky, in about 1911. He likely did not know it was the 50th anniversary of the Civil War that year, but his grandfather, Gabriel Thomas Penn, a Confederate veteran, did not let him forget it. Warren's grandfather lived on the isolated farmstead some 35 miles from Guthrie in southern Kentucky, where Warren had been born and grew up. It was with his grandfather on long summer days that little Red Warren ingested and cultivated a child's wondrous sense of history. Grandpa Penn was a lonely man. His wife had died many years earlier. He despised progress, Warren said, and most things modern, but he was a master storyteller. He told the grandson that only two good things ever came out of modernity: window screens and painless dentistry. I can vote for both of those. Sitting in a wicker chair under a cedar tree, corncob pipe in his mouth, Warren's grandfather would regale the little boy with stories of the war, his war. He served as a captain under the legendary and notorious Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest. He rode with Forrest, as they say, on that Tennessee-Kentucky border. Grandpa Penn participated in the massacre of black Union troops at Fort Pillow in Tennessee in 1863 as well, although he did not reveal any details of that one to the young man, or the young boy. He'd also been banished, claimed Warren, from Tennessee after the war because of participation in the hanging of Union guerrilla troops. I don't know if that one's true or not, but it made a good story. And crossing the Kentucky line had apparently provided refuge for this Confederate veteran. Grandpa Penn loved to recite poetry and even to sing for the boy in a cracked voice. Byron and Burns, served up in the grandfather's version of what Warren called a Scots tongue, were romantic annual July treats. In this romantic, what Warren called backward-looking world of changelessness, he found an ever-present history which he craved. But later in life, he would resurrect it over and over and over for interviewers and in his work with what he called a kind of puzzlement. For he had, he said, picked up a vaguely soaked-in popular notion of that Civil War.